Hello, beardlings and fellow students of strategy. This is not a full College of Dwarfology, nay, it is something smaller, something to add on to something that I have previously covered. This is going to be an appendix and add-on, a sidebar, if you will, to the water physics chapter of the College of Dwarfology, which I will link in the description below if you don't recall that video. Recently, in one of my streams, I realized I created a perfect example to demonstrate the exact update cycle, the update priorities of water when I created my base on stream. I'm not going to go over the exact methodology of all the water, but all you need to know is that while there is a layer of water below a drawbridge, it is held in place by said drawbridge and goes above that water for 2 Z levels. The lever has already been pushed to get this in motion. So I'm going to resume a little bit so we can get the lever, and we're going to update one at a time until the drawbridge is raised. Once the drawbridge is raised, it becomes a natural wall. I only clicked for 2 updates there. It becomes a natural wall on the right side, allowing the water to flow through into the entrance that I devised on the left side. This creates a lot of opportunities where the water can go up and can go down. The first update raised the bridge. The second update had the water go 1 and only 1 tick. We can already see the water is starting to shoot out from the pressure at top. Up top, it drew from the water up here randomly. It did not draw from the nearest point towards where the water was supposed to be going towards. I don't know if there's actually a proper mathematical equation behind it, but you cannot depend on the water closest to your drain going down first if you plan on doing anything with pressure. The second point is that the water, while updating from a higher position to a lower position, is merely choosing the squares that are closest. Only 6 squares are down below, which equates to these 6. And we'll notice that there's a lot more than 2. It's not like it went side down, side down, side down. I think we actually got lucky in that enough of it went to the side that eventually didn't update down. So in this regard, it has preferred to be at its own Z level before gravity took a hold of it. If I do another update, we see that it has shot out a lot on the upper Z level, but again, not quite so much on the bottom. This will eventually catch up to itself right around there, where the game has had enough updates to realize that it should be doing the vertical prioritization where it puts the water on the bottom. So the water up top will start having numbers less than 7 because the numbers up here can in fact be updated down below as well. And eventually, it's almost like this top line here hits dedicated lines. As the water goes down, it makes the water on the leading edge pull back a square. You start getting an irregular front going through it. Now this is relatively simple and benign, not something that you'd be able to rely on for any tips, tricks, what have you in the long run, but it's just interesting to see how the game does the updates when slowed down. However, we get to this position where the water up top is starting to hit a wall. If the water up top is unable to be updating anymore, all of a sudden we start seeing that the game realizes it's hit an edge, and massive amounts of water gets updated from up top down below. We see that what was a regular line has now acted like the water from before, where almost randomly it is taking water from up here and deposit it down below, and this front line has all but ceased. Even as I keep clicking, we don't see this front line pushing anymore. That's because horizontally it registered, even though it could keep pressing. It registered that it had hit a wall and thus switched everything to the water down below. Now, I actually went 1 more square than I really intended to. Once that water had stopped, water keeps pushing down here. However, we've now hit a point where the water has gone down the bridge and has gone down here. So we will have a similar issue to what we had before, where a pressure wave up top will kind of slow down a bit because it's now updating water from up there to down here. The water waves up here are going, but they're not getting full 7s. The full 7s are getting updated along the bottom line, and individual numbers are going from up here. The water up top, again, all but stopped in pressure because there's no reason for it once it hit the wall. This area has now filled meaning any and all updates it does has to go down here. So we'll notice this update, where before we were only seeing like 3 or 4 at a time, will update 20, 15, what have you, because this area had filled, but we're still getting water from over here. Don't forget about the initial area of water. It's still needing to update. It's still dumping off. It can't fill up here yet because it's still registering that it can be updated all the way down here. The lowest point is taking precedent. However, after that last update, the water has gone down yet another Z level. And what that means is the water up here can start being just eaten into, and the water up here quickly disappears as each and every one of them gets transported down to this lowest layer, while the layer above it is still getting updated at this upper layer. So all of the water that was up here for what have you for that surge quickly disappears and balances out as all of it gets transferred down to this lowest layer. Now, when this layer gets filled, what happens? The water still has to pressure. We have water coming in fresh from a source. So there's water coming in, which means it should pressure, so it should balance out. Problem is, the water that's here, the water that is here is higher than the water that is out there. That is the furthest point. So what do we see? The water bubbles up in this square. It doesn't bubble up out here. This is already 7s. It's not bubbling up here, even though this is the closest point. All this water is getting diverted. You don't see any wave here go down. It gets diverted all the way from this square, down 1 Z level, down another, because it's all one contiguous connection, up a Z level, over through this 7 connection, down a Z level, all the way over, and then finally back up. Essentially, what is pressuring this water is this line right here. As long as there's water here, the internal square over here is getting pressured. But it is always the closest point. It's not the this side isn't pressuring up. None of this is pressuring up. The person inside is actually relatively safe. If I had my archers here, and by the way, this was the major flaw to this base design. If I had my archers right here, oddly enough, my archers would be experiencing a flooding problem before the enemy I had trapped, because the water coming in is only bubbling up at the closest point. It will go sideways into wherever the enemy was, but because this is not the closest point, and neither is this, the enemy is actually further away from the water pressure than my dwarves are, causing a bit of an issue. And we see that it's gone all the way to full 7s, still going up, and the water is going out. I'm just going to let this update a little bit, as we clearly show that my dwarves are in far much more of a problem than any of the enemies I would have had on my little trap were. We let this update all the way and keep going. Now we are going to draw this out a little further just to really bring home the issue. And we are going to cheat in some liquids. We're going to make sure it's water, 7 deep, with a range of 9 by 9 by 5, because I want a lot of water to update through this. All that water is going to come down. It's going to have to update through here, and we see the pressure wave updating. But again, the pressure wave is updating from the closest point. When the pressure wave updates all the way around, eventually it starts updating on the backside. Once it hits that side, the pressure wave is now out here, as these are the closest squares. The pressure wave will essentially stop once some of it starts going down there, because that is leading to a drain. So you can't really, that's now a new low point, the water coming out through here. So the water can update horizontally now, but it'll be doing so slowly. If I were to do what I did again, we'll do it again just for some funsies. We see that the water had to pressure, but once we get to there, that's actually slowing it down. It's going to go all the way through, and then it goes back to just horizontal. It stops. Once there is a point where it can start going down, we stop getting the 7 blocks. This over here actually had a slight issue at the beginning, but once the water updated, we see we have 7 blocks down here, even though we've created an air pocket up here on top of it. So, horizontalness. The point of this, horizontal connections in water slows water down. Even if pressure can go through it, ultimately it slows water down, while verticality does not. The water in here is a massive hole. These are all 7s. There's no water here because it's down here, because it's down here, and it runs off the map. But we have 7 depth water that has been unable to leave the map, while above it we also have 7 depth water, even though there's an area in the middle without 7 depth. It doesn't update all at once at the same time, and it always chooses the closest square. So don't make my mistake, and do not assume that you've balanced out the water system right, because if it does go wrong, it's probably going to hit you before the enemy. This has been an appendix to the water episode of the College of Dwarfology. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.